Yo te de, yo te de, ay, oh, yo te de, yo te de, yo te de, ay, oh, yo te de, yo te de, yo te de, ay, oh, yo te de. Wato atake te. Hello, beloved. My dear friends, my dear friends. What did they say? Atsenata, new moon and an eclipse. A new moon and an eclipse. Lucky us. Lucky us indeed. Gosh, and there's just so much going on. There's already a ton of retrogrades, and trust me when I say it will not get lighter because there are more in store for us, but we'll get to that in a second. New moon in Leo, and eclipse also in Leo. A total solar eclipse. So what a jam-packed day. Interesting too, because I never really like do these during the daytime, but there's just so much to get out into the ether. The moon with Mercury, Jupiter, and the sun is such an interesting relationship, especially because Mercury is not just bringing the information that it has within that holding, but is very much also bringing the energy from its conversation with Mars, and its conversation with Jupiter, interestingly enough. Not Jupiter, with Uranus, interestingly enough, which will go retrograde later on in the year. Soon enough. It's very much kind of like a, it's a good feeling, but it's like a fuck around and find out kind of energy for sure. It makes me think of like the ways in which we're building relationships or compacting understandings of relationships. The energy is very much potent and about celebration, but I think that can also be opportunities for energy siphoning. But it's not like any room, never, every room has an asshole in it. And so the issue isn't energy vampires, the issue is how grounded we are. And so any opportunity for siphoning is an opportunity to redirect and ground back into the celebration or the collaboration of energy, and to ground into your own so that you know the difference between what is yours and what is not, and when you feel something pull at you a little bit higher. And so there's a lot of communal information, and it makes me think of that like audio bite that was really viral. Well, I feel like it's made multiple turns of virality, but was really viral at other points in time, where it was like somebody singing along, where it's like, I'm looking for some bitches I can hang with, da 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 da, something holla gang shit, and that, tell me, is it you, like, that's how everybody's kind of, or that's how the collective energy is kind of like reaching out toward all other planets, toward all other stars, toward all other wishes, toward all other dreams, toward other energies around us, and whether or not we're recognizing or reconciling within that energy. It's an interesting, like, fast trajectory. It makes me think too of that that meme where it's like, get in, loser, get in, bestie, we're going blah blah blah, get in, bestie, we're going to therapy, get in, loser, we're going shopping, whatever it is. There's so many versions of it. That's such a surprise. That's, very spontaneous. Quite honestly, I've even noticed that in so many more of my friends, that there's like a little bit more spontaneity to the ways in which they're willing to engage, or to engage with me, which is really fun. Because for sure, when I was younger, that was definitely like my role in the group. And so now to be on the receiving end of it is really beautiful. And so exciting, and it just makes me so happy for everybody that, I don't know, has grown with me. um, the ways in which the alignment of this eclipse and this new moon is very much like the grounding or conjuring space of energy, the creative space of energy, and then the mastery of energy in very quick time. So it's kind of like fast transitions, fast changes. Like don't blink, don't look away, or you'll miss the chemical reaction kind of thing. And not that you'll miss anything, just that we can be open to surprise. We can be open in any given moment to being surprised by that moment, because things happen so quickly, because transformation can happen so swiftly. So consider that, especially if you're feeling very down and out. Take a moment to breathe and consider all of the opportunities that are waiting for you to see them, to believe in them outside of the constriction of what has been before, or what is assumed to be, or etc., etc. There's very much an interesting component of prism and reflection in relation, and consider the shadow cast in that, the azimuth angle, if you will, that is very telling in direction, but has more to do with our, again, reflection, our receptivity, and therefore our relatability as well. Kind of going back to that, like all of these like friend songs or memes or what have you, the compacting of energy is and can be relation. The synthesis of energy can be relationship and collaboration rather than compromise. Siphoning is more so the compromise, the as if there's a finite amount of energy. And so again, rather than concern yourself with, energy vampires while you're celebrating the time, consider concerning yourself, or redirecting that concern back into how to ground better within your energy and within your body. And nobody can take from your energetic storage as if it's a finite resource, and nobody can take of your energetic storage as if it's not something that you're aware of. They may try, but they will not succeed. Trust me. People love to try with me in waking or in dreams, and it never fails to amuse me. I'm in all of the shadows cast. Please remember, new moon in Leo energy, to stand tall. And that's not just for sake of Leo, but for the trust and honor and pride of the wolf, be it alone or in a pack, and the ways in which they hail to the moon, they find themselves in the light of even the darkest skies, and use that as a navigation. That is, again, with Mercury, especially with its relationship to this moon, the call to energy, the receptivity to the call of others, finding other weirdos like you, finding your people, happens in your strangest places, happens in the most unexpected and strangest places. It's not going to be like, okay, a little bit of a deviation, but this is really very relevant. When we're looking for new ways to connect, like mind isn't necessarily even when that's like where that stops or what the goalpost is, because people can have the same thought but be very different, or have different value systems or different priorities or what have you. So perhaps we do away with the idea of like, where do I find like-minded individuals, and instead just find yourself engaging in your strangeness to find others then who are just as comfortable with their own strangeness and their capacity to engage. And in that, you might find people that look entirely different than you, and perhaps have very different minds than you, but share the same values and share the same or share a similar view of life, or share, even if not the same, like an illuminating contrast, or what's the word in color theory where the opposite color like illuminates the both, where it's like, so essentially it could be a totally different color, but it'll illuminate that process. Gosh, what's the word I'm looking for? Not composite, collaborative, contrasting, something. You know what I mean? Color theory. Color theory. They may be a very different color than you, but that may also be more like spirited than it is like minded. And that can open up a whole different set of avenues. This is also why I talk so much about understanding the antipode, or the antithesis, or the opposite side of whatever is going on. We draw our attention to where all of the planets are, but what is going on in the corner without any. And the interesting thing about that too is the sort of outsider or observer, even in this sort of alignment, is Pluto retrograde. So maybe we're feeling like outsiders or alone, but also retrograde, and has been removed from the crew in so many ways, right? Has been, outside of the popular group of planets, but is holding so much power, and is very much sort of pulling, I think, behind the scenes, pulling strings as to where things will move to, or where things will go. In a lot of ways, even, it's with Mars's relationship with Mercury, it reminds me of the ways in which, there's this experiment, the three Christs of some city, the three Christs of something, but it's three schizophrenics in holding in like Michigan or something, um, where they brought them together sort of to break that hallucination, that fantasy, that value, right? But instead, like, their idea was to neutralize, but instead it like exacerbated, and that's because they're failing to recognize like the antipode, or the opposite, or the antithesis, essentially, of whatever it is their perception is. This is the key of an azimuth angle, and again, the antipodes, where even in that experiment, the scientist was sort of like pulling strings to exacerbate circumstances. I very much think Pluto is doing that, and not to be like a jerk, not to be immoral, but very much to, like coyote medicine, to not trick you either, but to assist you in your own learning process, to help reveal the lesson, rather than to, point to and teach you in the way that Mars thinks it is doing with Mercury. But Mercury knows better than that, and Pluto is feeding this entire line of information in that way. I think Jupiter is also seeing this play out in an interesting way, and is recognizing that they aren't the only one in control, and that there are other elements beyond its control. So what we have established as, hierarchy, or a planetary ruler, or a principality, is also very much being humbled. Let that be a moment of embrace, rather than a moment of extreme discomfort. And again, stand tall. Stand tall and witness your shadow, because there's magic to be understood within your shadow as well. It's like a very old tantric practice to scry within the shadow, so as to tell the elemental makeup. So consider what you've been ignoring, because it will come back up, and that will come back up as well. Let's see. Send some love to all of the retrogrades, truly. Because there's more that will be coming in hot. Uranus will be going retrograde soon. I think it's very much a wallflower right now. But I think I think that energy will try to micromanage, or try to control, and I'm sure we'll go through a new wave of people redefining what community means, or some new idea, or some new psychological term that makes its, hashtag debut. I think there will also be periods of repeating dreams and repeating fear cycles. That is, again, asking us to notice this shadow and to stand tall in the face of it rather than to be driven to running or hiding, which, especially as Mars moves into Cancer, I think will very much be tempting. Tempting, because Mars loves to feel very insecure in that state. And that's not because it is naturally, that is because I think Western understandings of Cancer fail to recognize the origin point of, not the origin point of its depths, because it is a water sign. 80% of the ocean is completely unexplored, right? But it is the fire of water, and so there's a root point. It's like not knowing where your hot springs are, like not knowing where the hottest points under the earth are, not knowing where there's like volcanoes under the water, right? That can surprise you with a natural disaster. In that, please do not be swayed by this level of intensity. Do not be misled. Do not be swayed by something outside of you. Again, that, collective understanding and collaboration of energy, or siphoning of energy. But Mars's relationship um, to to Mercury and to Uranus. Do not be vengeful. Annoyance is very real, for sure. I get it. But it is also a missed opportunity to make your communication clear and to make your conditions just so. Anytime I'm annoyed, it is an opportunity to communicate what it is that would ease that annoyance. And chances are that situation, or that situation, person, whatever, wasn't intending to annoy you. And so we can build a bridge, we can communicate. And if they are intending, then we have a very clear crossing of boundaries, and we know, hey, I can't control you, but I can control myself, so I'm gonna take myself the fuck out of here. With that being said, rather than missed opportunity, perhaps a better way to put it is an avoided responsibility. Because we have a responsibility to communicate with our desire, what it is we internally need, want, and share receptively. And we have a responsibility for our capacity to communicate that desire outward, and our responsibility to that impact. So, consider, when you're annoyed with somebody else, maybe you're really just annoyed with yourself for not speaking up sooner. Something else to consider with this eclipse, with this total solar eclipse, which will be a lunar eclipse toward the end of the month, toward the end of this month or next month, toward the end of this month, I'm pretty sure. There'll be a total solar eclipse and then a lunar eclipse. And it's very powerful. It feels very beautiful. I know there's a lot of like traditional lore of fearfulness around it, but I think that is a theme because it's asking for witness. Not just perception, but witness. Because witness is felt. Perception is just seen. And there is a difference. I think this eclipse is very intensely fed by Jupiter. And so, again, with Mars in Cancer and Jupiter, maybe recognizing that it's not the only one in control right now, there's a little overwhelm, there's a little antsiness, there's a feeling of loss of control. However, this is also long-term memory that I think can be spun much farther into the future than we're willing to give ourselves credit for, which is also all the more reason to, again, witness these shadows and stand tall in the face of them, because I think especially when Uranus goes retrograde, when Venus goes retrograde, on top of all of these retrogrades that we'll have through the remainder of the year, is a moment in time, especially with Chiron and Taurus, is a moment in time where old wounds, past wounds, things that we haven't fixed in the house, really give out, ultimately give out. If you've been needing to, I don't know, patch a wall, fix a floor, take a car in, whatever it is, do that. Do that, because the more that we prolong or procrastinate, the more that situation festers, the bigger that it gets. Again, collaborating, compounding energy, um, compounding energy that tends to just add more weight and more density. And it's like, then you turn around, a month or two from now, and you're like, what the fuck? Why am I dragging so much? And it's because all of this information is dragging along behind you. All of this unrequited information, all of this, ignored information, be it, trauma, memories, what have you. Um, Even this undigested spiritual information as we grow will weigh you down. And like I said, the trajectory of this energy moving into the future, I think we also underestimate the trajectory of information that we have ignored, or the trajectory of information that can still rise to the surface. It's like, how killers will throw bodies into the river and then they all come up to the river because they weren't disposed of properly. Or like in, what is it, an interview with a vampire in the second season, maybe, there's a scene where one of the vampires like goes on a spree and dumps the bodies in the river, and then the river like dries up somewhat, and all of the bodies are like right there for you to see. It's like that. And so consider what we do with our water, and if we flood the wound simply to ignore, or if we use it as a healing modality. This all sounds like, it's a lot. It always is. It's a lot. It always is. And it's a very organic transitional state, lots of movement, and that is because so much of it has to do with relativity, relatability, but relativity in that reflection. Because everything's relative to perspective. So if you are in control of your perspective, then you have a stable point with which to understand your like kinesthetic sense of self in time and space. But if your perspective is easily swayed or shifted or distorted by a rise of emotions, surplus of emotion imbued, then your relatability is really tied to that, and then your reflection is very tied to that, and your scope of view very much narrows into that point, rather than to expand in more relatability, to expand in more potentiality or possibility. It's like an old spiritual adage, I suppose. I wish I could tell you who said it, but I've heard it so often that I don't know. The idea that like, before spiritual enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After spiritual enlightenment, chop wood, carry water, is very much at play here. For as busy as things are, for yes, there being this sort of celebratory energy around it, chop wood, carry water. Just do it. Chop wood, carry water, and that is you making your circumstances just so just. Chop wood, carry water, store wood, share wood. That is what continues to make the fire, so that your fire can always burn, and so that your fire can always grow. Chop wood, carry water. Store wood, share wood. Simple as that. Consider the directions of your person in this moment as we find ourselves in kinesthetic sense through the threshold of change, of great change. That your charge is that fire, is that desire that you cultivate, that you're able to communicate, that momentum that fire is given. And consider even of any emotion, that momentum, the ways in which we relay information, the ways in which we relate to information, the ways in which we make information relatable, is the ways in which we sort of can toss this energy, back and forth, oscillating, creating. When that information gains more pressure, speed, potentiality in space, it is because it's grounded, it is because it's rooted. Like an electrical circuit has a grounding so that energy can pass, so that energy can travel. And the direction too, again, like I said, is very organic. Our intentions are kind of these living things. Our perspective shifts, and so it moves. The ascending direction is an oscillator, is an oscillation of that energy. And so it always kind of bounces back to you too, like light off of a mirror. And in that, sharing information, space, what have you, relatability, relaying that information, and the relatability in between that is where that energy grows, is how that energy expands outside of itself, rather than just to turn it within itself. Consider not feeling very grounded. You feel very charged about the world, and anger, frustration, and loneliness, what have you. And the momentum is very much tied to your memory of the way in which things have moved before, in which case we tend to stay within these fricative states, lacking sense of self, lacking grounding, and spinning out of control, oscillating toward things that aren't necessarily in line with us, or finding ourselves burrowing within the self, isolating even more, because the oscillation of our intention is then directed back into the memory, back into the space in between, and without grounding. So consider the ways in which the energy moves from east to west, from north to south, from antipode to antipode, through polarities, to find a stable state. Because polarity is not the end-all be-all. Polarity is just a sign or symptom revealing the tertiary truth. So, consider, my friends. Consider the threshold, much like the cell wall of information passing from or to. Consider our alignment with Sirius. The dog days are not over yet. So, let's pull some cards. Let us pull some cards and see what it is this moon and eclipse have in store for us. And to clarify, again, new moon and solar eclipse in Leo, but Leo is not just a roaring lion of confidence and flame. In fact, it is the wolf of the northern winds howling. It is the star of guiding light, moving at the speed of light, carrying all messages and information in between. And the speed of light does not mean brush. Does not mean rush. It doesn't mean illuminate. It doesn't mean piercing. That does mean clearly. That does mean energy directed. That does mean hope. All right, my friends. For those of you that have only seen me read on TikTok or what have you, Yes, I read in tarot, but I also read in cartomancy, which means in numbers, because that does give us a little bit more of a literal time innervation, chemically, elementally, within the body. And so I think that is particularly useful for these sort of grand scheme readings. They do very much operate well together, like time and space. But I do think it gives us a little bit more to hold and feel, and a little bit more clarity. Consider also the ways in which our elders, our ancestors, were able to use the most mundane of things as tools of communication with the earth, with the environment, with spirit, and with its transformations. Though we have heard that the tarot was a secret game. It wasn't a game, it never is a game. But par for the course for Western occults to withhold information. Thus, the patriarchy persists. And so in cartomancy, I do think there's something really beautiful about the ways in which people have been able to maintain these bonds, these connections, this information, and perhaps more covertly so, because they had to. This is also an invitation for breath. You don't have to tap into anything, that's my gig, but simply opening yourself to your breath, only 3 breaths as we tap in, can be so revealing in and of itself. And so all I ask from you in this invitation for breath is that you open your body to the deepest breath that you can find, and to any sensations that may arise. Friend. Much like we are hanging out, much like we have cards in between us. Much like we are hanging out, much like we have cards in between us. Because we do, because we are. We're going to take 3 deep breaths together. Again, like I said, simply opening your body to the fullest breath that you can find, and opening your awareness to any sensations that arise. Take a deep breath in. And exhale. Take a deep breath in. And exhale. Take a deep breath in. And exhale. Okay. Generally, it feels kind of like stressed, pressured, and particularly ungrounded. Like there's a digestive process that's still happening too, or that needs to happen. Which even in just those 3 breaths, like that does, slow down and dilate time a little bit more. Allows you the space to be able to move internally in all your processes. We spend so much time like rushing to or catching up in some way that there's so much to be digested still within us. And so consider what else you're taking on or adding on to the systems, like adding on to your plate, adding on to yourself, before fully considering how stable it is you are in holding it, how much capacity I guess you have. And that's not to say like oh, I naturally have a low capacity for joy or tension. That is to say, now's the time when you work on that, because it's like any, muscle, or viscous fluid rubber band. It grows stagnant and it grows kind of atrophied, I suppose. And so capacity isn't an issue of like, stock engine not being able to make it. Capacity is an issue of how often you allow for yourself to perceive yourself. Honestly, openly, and without any limitations. Because that capacity is regenerative, is infinite, really. And not something that any one of us are incapable of growing in or establishing a more familiar relationship with. Gosh, what else? Yeah, breathe more. It'll help you digest, particularly through your nose. Careful with consumption or with overconsumption in some way, shape, or form. And, not just digesting, but investing more of your time into the act of perceiving yourself rather than whether or not you feel perceived. Do you see yourself when you look in the mirror versus wondering why social media doesn't recognize us or see us for who we are, blah, 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 blah. It's kind of a reflective state, really. Truly. Interesting. Gosh, my stomach hurts now. Gosh, okay. There's also probably like a whole new wave of fucking new age hippy dippy white supremacy shit that is ripping open their third eye, building a lot of ego in sense of self, or consuming information and not embodying, not grounding that information. So it's like very top heavy, feeble legs, and that kind of ego can be very volatile because it is very fragile. And so anything that pushes against that identity cracks and screams because it was never meant to be so superficial or such an important part of the visage. Like we wouldn't you never see fucking church doors with stained glass in the door. You never see like old school churches with stained glass in the door, and that is because that would be very fragile face to it. It's in all of the other modes of view, right, and modes of perspective, but the framing in the door is meant to be grounding. If anything, they're like super chunky, heavy wood, right, which is kind of like a resonator. It's very much kind of like a resonator. And so in what ways do we or can we use like the mouth, the throat, like the chest cavity? Because if you think, entry into the heart, but entry also into the mouth, exit with speaking, how do we use that itself as a resonator for the perception that is already within us? Like the eyes of the stained glass windows, the ears of the stained glass windows, the psyche in the mind is these stained glass windows, right? The door in the heart and in the throat is simply a resonator for that processing of information. And I think there's a lot of not necessarily grounding into that before it's passed through or moved through or proclaimed in some way. And that is, I think, a product of desperation, of wounding in the heart that then, like a banshee screaming, that then just needs to be seen as if that's witness, as if that in and of itself would be justice. But it's kind of like an empty, like screaming in an empty room. Three of clubs, five of hearts. Three of clubs, eight of hearts, five of spades. Jack of clubs at the bottom of the deck. Interesting. That desire, that root desire in the direction that is the fire to tend to. What did I say about that? And in a way that is not infallible. The Jack of clubs is very much learning, very much kind that would drop something or trip over themselves, right? But not that's not ploy or play on any of their character. Their capacity to recover, maybe even to like laugh it off, laugh at themselves, is integral, is important. And that's the thing too. Jack of clubs inverted, integrity. We can't take ourselves too seriously, but we also cannot consider ourselves an absolute joke or like completely unreal, it's like, the difference between laughing with you or laughing at you. This person is able to laugh at themselves, but is also grounded and integral. So when they're like, being made fun of, like they're not going to join into laughing at, laughing with. Again, comparison or collaboration, that compacting of energy and where it sways you or what doors it opens of perception. Don't take yourself too seriously, but also don't consider yourself a joke. This is that graceful place in between, like, too much confidence makes for ego, and too much humbleness makes for insecurity. There's a steady line in the middle of that, where we're able to be introspective, but not degrading. And consider the outside of that, like the converse of that, outside of it would be, we're so critical of ourselves that we also let other people be less critical of themselves and kind of overcompensate. And that's a misuse of fire, very much so. The fire is for your sight and illumination to thrive. It's a beautiful thing that is shared in it, but it is not meant for others implicitly, like a disembodied thing. When we sacrifice ourselves like that, it's very literally like cutting off a finger, like cutting off a limb. This is also the lore and the occult that certain body parts would be kept as sort of these like magical talismans. The left hand of a hanged man and what have you. This Jack of clubs very much reminds me of that kind of, like the person who would have been that, who would have been the body, and whether or not that would have been appropriate or received. Most likely not, right? I would imagine. Most likely not. But we tend to do that with others, like people pleasing to some degree. It can have many faces. Sometimes it's covert narcissism that really just like needs to feel needed. Sometimes it is also like an inner mistrust and kind of like, I guess, like masochism, an inner mistrust and sort of like self-harm to constantly sacrifice yourself or parts of yourself or versions of yourself or expend your energy for energy that does not give the same back to you. The Three of Clubs inverted, the fire here inverted is directed inward. For as much as we're like engaged in perception and celebration and company and just the pop culture of the amount of times that we hear the word community without like an actual display, embodiment, understanding of what it is, let alone love, let alone truth. But this fire being directed is an internal understanding. It is a deeper internal understanding. Almost like, have we forgot what home looked like? Have we forgot what home felt like? Because this is home. Remind yourself of just how important that is, how sacred that is, how much nurturing you're willing to even, afford to that space. In a, literal home, we would never let infestation persist, right? We would never let broken go unfixed. We would never let spills go uncleaned. And yet, in the home of our bodies, we have spilled things, on our internal floors and never mopped it up, and so the wood is rotting. We have neglected to sweep, and so there's dust on all of the shelves in our mind. We have broken windows and fits of rage and never fixed them, and so there's wind passing through in the mind of other people's thoughts and ideologies that are able to grab hold because, like pollen, they recognize the anger, they recognize the emotions that we hide from, that we ignore as fertile ground. And then we wonder where this intensity comes from or why we feel like we do. This Three of Clubs inverted is like internal flame, like how you can build shelter with a campfire in it, or with like a stove in it. Igloos can have sources of heat. You can make all kinds of bushcraft shelters that are also very accommodating of the heat. This is what we must do within us, not to accommodate the heat as in undesirable and intensity, but to this is where we again engage with capacity to accommodate our capacity to see in the night, our capacity to feel cozy, comfortable, our capacity to eat. It's like basic survival, and quite honestly, hanging on to things that we're also not gonna move with, that we're not going to make with, that we're not going to create with or mold with, is dishonoring home, is overclocking the capacity. And it's like, oh, I don't have the bandwidth, I don't have the mental capacity, I don't have the patience for da 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 da. And it's like, you just already are allocating all of that information or all of that energy toward things that don't fucking matter, toward things that are unnecessary. It's funny how we can be impatient with people in a line, but we're able to get through the impatience of ads on whatever freaking streaming platform or what have you. And so it's really just a matter of what we're willing to apply it to, and whether or not we've deemed that, worthy or unworthy in some way, shape, or form, which is very much like an internal hierarchy within the self. That's internal patriarchy, internal hierarchy of what is worth it or not. And this is very interesting. Because even I've noticed that. This is one why I created Banish the Patriarchy as an activation, as a psychosomatic and like physiological movement and lecture practice, as sort of this magical threshold, even because going through that process you do not come back the same. And it is something that is regenerative in and of itself, that even I can return to, or even I can recognize that, like, oh wow, there's still some things within me and the ways in which I compare or contrast myself that are still very much rooted in hierarchy or in patriarchal understanding, and what is worth or what is value. And I can undo that. We can all undo that by bringing our awareness to the innermost flame and understanding where that even comes from, where that understanding even comes from, why we oscillate in between these places. Who told us that? Who offered us that information? Eight of Hearts. Who offered us that information and why? It's like, this is the fire. This is somebody who said they were giving you firewood, but instead they gave you like rotty, wet, nonsense wood that can't even be used, right? And it's not that it cannot, it is a learning experience. It can't be used for fire, but it can be used for information. Where, okay, we know that maybe this person needs help keeping their wood safe. Or maybe this person doesn't give a shit. And I'm engaging with a friend who does not also have my best interests at heart. Like, it very much can go both ways, but 8 is very much like that. Harmony and balance, and when inverted, it's a lack of harmony and balance within ourselves, or not being able to see it, or not being able to, define it, and a disharmony in the ways in which we relate. So it very much does also always come back to within. Okay, this is the only thing I can control. How do I move with that? This is the only thing that I can navigate, is me. I can't force things on other people. Then how do I move with that? The 3 of Clubs is the momentum of your natural movement in your fire. 5 of Spades. 5 of Spades, creative space, into the creative space. It's like we're in the mouth being chewed up right now, so that we can then be spit into healing, into cleansing, into the ether later. It's very much the creative space of your energy and of your mind, most definitely, what your mind decides to do with that energy. And so consider the stories that your mind is telling, the stories that you have told yourself thus far, and the kind of story that you want to tell yourself in the future. Because the 5 of Spades is that story, and you are only limited by the ways in which you're willing to write it. And again, it is a perspective issue. It is an interesting perspective. And perhaps more interesting when we're willing and able to question or challenge perspective, to shift perspectives, so as to illuminate new opportunities, new doorways, new means by which to travel through. Interesting. The ways the fire moves, so much of this, the patriarchy has come up, religious indoctrination is always a thing. Just patterns of nurture, I suppose, that have been conflated as if they are nature, are being disturbed and need to change. Consider what stories you've been told, why at all you've given them credibility, and how it is we can free the energy and direct the energy from that understanding, because this is very much dictated by that. Maybe not dictated, but it's a byproduct of that. Where the 5 of Spades is like shading the eyes to our capacity to even find or see the true ontology of our energy. But then is also like so upset at how dim things are or can get. But it's like, dude, but you turn the light off. What do you mean it's dark in here? You turn the light off. Like, dude, what do you mean? You blew the candle out. What do you mean it's dark in here? like going into the basement, didn't turn on the light. What do you mean it's dark in here? Why are you mad you stubbed your toe? You didn't turn on the light. It's very silly. It's very silly. However, it is an interesting tangle of energies that we have very much the capacity and the potency and power to be able to untangle and thus weave in the ways in which we need. Consider even in that very literal metaphor, where experience and memory has been matted, we can come through and align and then braid in their own distinct sections so that there is union, so that there is balance, rather than a knot. Interesting. Interesting. The emotions are so driven by the root and where these things come from. And it is not even because it's the way that it is, it's because it's the way that it has been before. But all of that's going to change. And it will expand rapidly or it will implode. It will expand rapidly or you will feel the pressure against like nobody knows. Yeah. Ground so that energy can oscillate rather than just be ungrounded charge passing like ping pong balls in momentum. And realistically, like I said, and that has already come up, Banish the Patriarchy is a course that is so readily available and is a regenerative process of lecturing, activation, asana and movement, and a renewed sense of motivation. It is very much an introspective process that the more that we are able to do, then we are opening the energy and the eyes of ourselves and the world to a paradigm without that. So many people struggle to be able to imagine a world without the systems that they're used to, simply because they have not imagined it before. And so it is our responsibility to feed wonder and possibility. And not just that, but that course works hand in hand with Decolonize Your Mind. And 100% before Source Code Breath, I would consider doing the religious healing course, the religious trauma healing course, which is Indoctrinated Anonymous, the antidote to indoctrination. And interestingly enough, I think that will very much direct you to this space in a way where this energy can be evenly dispersed, recognized, and understood, and where all of the stipulations and withholdings and rains and strains upon our energy in indoctrination, be it social, be it political, be it religious, or any other, is simply rules and lines that we are now being asked to color outside of. That we are better off if we color outside of those lines. So, if you like coloring and coloring outside of the lines, that's a course for you, for sure. Let's see. We'll pull a little spirits to weave these things together. Fears. Beautiful. Again, my friends, an invitation to breathe. All I ask is for you to find the fullest breath that you can, and to open your awareness to any sensations that may arise. Take a deep breath in. And exhale. Take a deep breath in. And exhale. Take a deep breath in. And exhale. Interesting. Interesting. It feels very dense. Kind of nauseating, honestly. And that's maybe because collectively, with everything that I've just said, I can just hear it where people are like, but my mind's not a safe place, but my body's not a safe place, and like, for sure, I get it. Chronic pain, chronic mental health, chronic health issues, absolutely. However, how do we make ourselves more comfortable in our capacity to even deal with those things? And that is also a way in which we help the body to digest the intensity of these feelings, to digest the intensity of experiences in life and what have you. Quite honestly, I don't think I've ever met somebody with chronic pain that doesn't have a lot of trauma. And so the ways in which we can assist the nervous system in digesting that just as well as the physical body is pertinent. And even just in that, like the density and the space that I found in me is really potent, is really powerful. So again, can't take yourself too seriously, but also you're not a joke. Can't take yourself too seriously, but you can afford to take yourself as some sort of real, as some sort of serious to an extent. And that is just giving myself a little bit more faith, not throwing in the towel, and continuing to honor the vessel that we are in, regardless of the feelings that it's in. We don't burn the house down just because some of the components of it aren't working. Quite literally, honestly. Places will literally be floors falling in, ceilings falling in, and people still won't tear down the house. So why do you tear yourself down when you're not even in that kind of shape? An accentuation on the Five of Spades, the boundaries, the limitations, the prison of our own mind, and the ways in which we serve, the ways in which we serve blood, like ritual, the ways in which we purge, the ways in which we purge. Because yes, it's very uncomfortable when life humbles you. But when you humble yourself, you take yourself into a very transcendental place. If this was life circumstances humbling this person, they'd be in agony. But it is them humbling themselves, which brings a whole new dynamic to the opportunity. Ace of Swords, top of the deck, inverted. So it's like, this is very funny. Question everything. Question what you think you know. If you think you know something, well, prepare to be surprised. And that's like, I mean that in the most fun and like best way too. Not in like a, you're stupid, wipe your brain, but in the context of like, are you open to new information? For as much as people pervert the idea of like scientific theory or scientific method, even, it's not so clear cut and so poignantly defined. If anything, I think the best scientists um, and the most pivotal experiments haven't been because this is what is, and so this is what must be, but has been because, well, if this is what is, then what isn't? If this is what is, then what would have to happen to make this more true or less true or what have you? And it becomes a very open ended question, where even the most sure component of an experiment is then investigated as if it is the most unsure, so as to allow for more information to come to fruition, to allow for further study, And there's so many interesting papers that I've read that really just end like of profound conclusions, and then it'll end with more study is needed, more research is required. And I love that, because even though all have been convinced that, like, oh, this is the thing, this is what happens, this opens up so many doors, the scientist in themselves humbles himself in their own work by saying, well, further research is needed, so as not to be so definitive. And I think we can do that with ourselves too. Like, how many times have people been like, oh, I'm just unlovable, like, oh, I'm unrelation. Me and my friends actually used to say that, unrelationshipable, um, which is really such a funny word. And consider the millions and billions of possibilities out there in the world of people we've never met, of situations we've never seen or been in, and of ways in which we didn't even know we could love. And I think that's the beautiful thing about this Ace of Swords inverted. It is not that we've lost ourselves, that we've lost all sense, although for sure there's some of that. It is that when we allow ourselves to question curiously, not just like, in rage or in anger, or like, when some people are just fucking negging, but to question out of curiosity, like toddlers, like, but why, but why, but why? And as much as we may think that they're just trying to be fucking annoying, they're trying to understand the world as we do. And I think we consider it annoying or frustrating when we're faced with or have to confront that we don't even know. And then again, that hierarchy thing that is so poisonous in Western patriarchy. And so consider that. There is no hierarchy in your inner reasoning. This is why we have a spiritual council. This is why we have, various versions of ourselves internally. And that's not just like dissociative identity disorder. That's not just fragmented self. That is various expansive versions of self, where the fractions or the fragments of self still make the whole. And this is, I think, the big thing between being able to communicate with your left and right brain, or your variations of self, young you, old you, da 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 da, and or versus dissociative identity disorder, where in that diagnosis the fragments are taken as the whole. And it is a trauma response, when realistically, like, yes, in trauma fragments happen, but we mend those fragments so as to like welcome them back into the whole in a beautiful way, which is ultimately, I think, the difference between fragmented self and diagnosis, or recognizing versions of self in spiritual counsel. So, again, don't take yourself too seriously, and also don't take yourself not serious at all. Neither of those is an end-all be-all situation of, absurdity or insanity or civility. And so it's high time we move beyond that metric. And even with this sword turned down, because it has nothing to fight with, because it's not measuring anything, like measure a thing with a ruler with a long end, right? Here to here is blah blah blah. when we're no longer measuring by flat two-dimensional metrics, our system of measurement can change. And this, I think, is curiosity versus overwhelm in a great way. Curiosity to investigate the inner journey into the self in a deeper and deeper way, to be able to receive or to be able to receive or absorb information without being defensive, and finding lightheartedness in that without overwhelm. Party. 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 All right. All right, my friends. Let us integrate. Let us integrate in breath and cycle of harmonies, because I think it is profoundly important, not just because it moves through and cleanses and unites every element, but because, without a doubt, especially because it starts in fire, I think that is the greatest glimpse to how we can locate our fire, how we can direct that fire. And every time I'm able to do it with groups of people, with crowds of people, with whoever's online with me, it is my hope that they find something that they didn't realize was there before in them because of that fire breath, and because of its relation to each element and their functions or purposes in the body. And without a doubt, most often people have a real easy time with an air breath, because most people are breathing in and out through their mouths, just fucking exasperating and in hypoxic state. And most people find the water breath particularly easier, and that's because we're either like anally retentive, or we're like completely trying to release every aspect of ourselves or escape ourselves in some way, shape, or form. When realistically, and what I would hope for, is that I hear that less and less and less, that those were the easiest ones, and that more and more I hear just how relieving, rewarding that fire and that earth breath are, and just how much we can turn back to that. So, without further ado, the cycle of harmonies, my friend, where we utilize the 13 of magic beyond the internal vortex of the 12 Western horoscope. Because even in that, it is just fragments. And the 13th is the totality and the whole, is the bonding and binding agent of all things. So, a fire breath is in through the mouth, out through the nose. We do that 3 times. An earth breath is in through the nose, out through the nose. And we do that 3 times. An air breath is in through the mouth and out through the mouth 3 times. And a water breath is in through the nose, out through the mouth 3 times. That does give us 12. And so the 13th, we inhale through the nose. And we prepare the body for a hum or a sigh or an elm. Consider, if you feel silly doing an elm, a sigh is still very good for your nervous system. A hum is still very good for your nervous system, the nitrous oxide content in your blood and in your body. But an elm is a beautiful thing. And so if you care to engage, the ah, you'll find, much like I said, at the deepest point of your breath, deepest point of your root. It's almost like you're like scooping ice cream out of your jug. Scooping ice cream out of your. The ah then moves upwards into the chest, expanding lengthwise, expanding horizontally, before getting like a full body of the sound before we direct that trajectory upwards. Which, interestingly enough, is that not this whole process exactly? Oh, there we go. This whole process exactly. Very literally. And so what a beautiful thing. This album will feel like this is supposed to. And it's an experience that I hope carries over in resonance and ripples through this eclipse, this moon, and every movement after. Perfect. Lovely. All right, my friends. All I ask is that you simply bring your awareness to your breath as it is, with no judgment, no preconceived notion, with no need for assertion. And notice just like that, how the breath blooms in you. Small and subtle at first, but it is almost like it has to be felt, not just observed. Sip the air in through your mouth and direct that exhale out through your nose, feeling that breath rise up into the chest and behind the eyes. Inhale through your mouth, feeling the breath fill in the space between your hips and the belly, and exhaling through the nose, feeling that breath rise to the space behind your eyes. Inhaling through the mouth and exhaling through the nose, feeling your nervous system awaken, perhaps feeling some heat now in the palms of your hands. Inhaling through the nose and exhaling through the nose. Inhaling through the nose, receiving air, feeling the jaw soften, the throat widen. And exhale through the nose, feeling that breath descend now into your belly, where it has risen before, and where it is now, more grounding and nourishing. Inhale through your nose, feeling air pass evenly through both nostrils, perhaps noticing just how long your inhale can be. And exhale through the nose, feeling that breath descend into the body, down and around your shoulders, into the hips, into the thighs. Inhaling through the mouth, sweeping wind across the shelves of your mind, and drawing the tongue out to exhale. Clearing any debris in the central channel of you. Inhaling through the mouth, feeling that gust of wind sweep through your mind, and drawing the tongue out to exhale. Feeling your diaphragm rise to meet the mind united in the heart. This is where we create collaboration in the breath. Inhaling through the mouth and drawing the tongue out to exhale. Feeling that diaphragm rise, the belly button leap toward the spine. This is how we churn energy and create space for new. Inhaling through the nose now, feeling breath pass evenly through both nostrils. And exhale through the mouth, gently, patiently, like a whistle into the night or day. Inhaling through the nose, feeling the body receive and accept air as it spreads through you. And exhaling through the mouth, gently, patiently, and for as long as you can. Inhaling through the nose, feeling the cheeks soften, jaw soften. And exhaling through the mouth, releasing any remaining tension, clearing the path before you as you have also cleared a path within you. Breathing in through the nose again to prepare the body for a hum or an om. Notice the vibrations that you still feel in your bones, underneath your skin, subtly. Allow yourself to sit, like bathing in your own rippling waters, simply noticing, simply observing, and also very deeply witnessing, because it is not just perception, but it is deeply felt and experienced in you. How often do you experience your breath? When's the last time you remember experiencing breathing, really, truly, actively? This is how we continue to move. This is how we continue to ground, so that that movement can be more graceful, more well-paced. So we have the capacity to hold all that we are. Wow, wow, wow. I'm just looking at this like, yep, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. All right, my friends. Enjoy, embrace, take some time, sit with it. Don't underestimate drinking some water and hydrating, because your water too is a very conscious tool in assisting the body in integration and transformation as well. Never underestimate an incense or smoke in general, as it helps these spirits pass. And maybe now's the perfect time to consider that. What message will we pass? What message will we allow to come to pass? Because it is the story of our own choosing. Many blessings to you. Because she's about to get real. And thank you for being here. I appreciate you very, very much. And I hope to see you soon. I'll see you next time. Thanks for being here. Thank you for your presence, your awareness, and your receptivity. Catch you on the flip side. Don't attack,